Most people think anger is caused by other people. It's not. That one comment didn't ruin your day. That one message didn't disrespect you. That one situation didn't make you lose control. You did. And that's not an insult. It's power if you're willing to see it. Because the moment you realize no one actually controls how you feel, you stop being easy to control. Think about your last reaction. Someone said something slightly off. A coworker ignored you. A stranger acted rude. And suddenly, your mood shifted. Your chest tightened. Your mind started replaying the moment over and over again. You carried it with you into your work, into your conversations, into your sleep. Not because it mattered that much, but because you reacted without choosing. That's how most people live. Constantly reacting, constantly triggered, constantly giving pieces of their peace away to people who don't even think about them twice. And the worst part? They believe it's normal. They believe that's just how emotions work. It's not. There is a different way to move through the world. A way where people can talk, act, judge, ignore, provoke, and none of it shakes you. Not because you're numb, not because you suppress everything, but because you understand something most people never do. Nothing reaches you unless you let it in. In this video, you're going to see what's really happening beneath anger, why certain people get under your skin so easily, and how to break that pattern completely. You'll learn how to create a space between what happens to you and how you respond, a space where your power lives. A space where you're no longer controlled by impulse, ego, or expectation. And once you master that, you don't just manage anger. You outgrow it. By the end of this video, you won't see frustration the same way again. You won't see difficult people the same way again. More importantly, you won't see yourself the same way again. Let's begin. 1. The nature of anger and reaction. Anger feels immediate, like it just happens. But it doesn't. What feels like an instant reaction is actually a silent agreement between what happened and what you decided it meant. That's the part most people never see. They think the world is constantly doing things to them, disrespecting them, provoking them, crossing their boundaries. So they live in defense mode, always ready to react, always one step away from being triggered. But here's the truth. You're not reacting to what happened. You're reacting to your interpretation of what happened. Two people can hear the same comment. One shrugs it off, the other carries it all day. Same words, different meaning. And meaning is chosen. Not consciously at first, but still chosen. Most of those choices were trained into you, from past experiences, from how you were treated, from what you learned to expect from people. So now, you don't respond to reality. You respond to a pattern, and that pattern runs fast. Faster than thought. That's why anger feels automatic. But automatic doesn't mean uncontrollable. It just means you haven't looked at it closely enough yet. Let me show you what this looks like in real life. You send a message to someone, a colleague, a friend, maybe even a client. They read it. They don't reply. Minutes pass. Then, an hour. Your mind starts filling in the silence. They're ignoring me. That's disrespectful. I wouldn't do that to them. And just like that, your mood shifts. Nothing actually happened. No insult. No confrontation. Just silence. But your interpretation turned it into a problem. Now you feel irritated, maybe even angry. Not because of reality, but because of the story you built around it. I remember a moment like this. I was waiting for a response that mattered. Something important. Hours went by, and I could feel it building, that quiet frustration turning into tension. I started rehearsing conversations in my head, imagining what I would say when they finally replied. Then, later that night, a message came through. "Sorry, I've been in back-to-back meetings all day." That was it. No disrespect, no hidden meaning, just reality. And suddenly, all that anger had nowhere to go, because it was never about them. It was built entirely in my own mind. That's the moment something clicks. You realize you don't suffer because of what people do. You suffer because of what you assume. And assumptions are rarely neutral. They're shaped by insecurity, by ego, by expectation. Here's the shift. Instead of asking, "Why did they do that to me?" ask, "Why did this affect me so much?" That question changes everything, because it turns your attention inward where the real control is. And control is what you're after. Not over people, not over situations, but over your own reactions. Here's a line to remember. You don't control what reaches your ears, but you control what reaches your mind. And another, anger isn't forced on you. It's accepted faster than you realize. Once you start seeing this, you begin to notice the gap, that tiny space between what happens and how you respond. At first, it feels almost invisible, but it's there. And in that space is your freedom. That's what we're going to explore next. 2. Rewriting the inner script. You don't react the way you do by accident. You've been trained into it. Every time you felt disrespected and snapped, every time you felt ignored and withdrew, every time you took something personally, a pattern was reinforced. Over time, that pattern became your default script. So now, situations don't feel new. They feel familiar. Not because they are the same, but because you're running the same response. That's why two different people can treat you differently, yet you end up feeling the same emotion. It's not about them anymore. It's about the script you keep replaying. But here's where it gets interesting. If a script can be learned, it can be rewritten. And the first step is realizing something most people overlook. There is always a gap between what happens and what you do next. It's small, sometimes just a second, but it's there. And inside that gap, you're not your past. You're not your habit. You're not your impulse. You're a choice. Most people never notice that gap. They move too fast. So, the script runs automatically. But when you slow it down, you start to see it. Let's bring this into real life. You're in a meeting. You share an idea. Someone cuts you off mid-sentence. Immediately, something rises. A tightness. A sense of being dismissed. Your usual script kicks in. They don't respect me. I need to push back. And just like that, your tone changes. Your energy shifts. Now the room feels tense. But imagine something different. The same moment. The same interruption. But instead of reacting instantly, you pause. Just for a second. And in that second, you see the script. You don't follow it. You observe it. Then you choose something else. You calmly say, "Let me finish that thought." No tension. No ego. Just clarity. Same situation. Completely different outcome. Not because the world changed, but because you did. I learned this the hard way. There was a time when I took everything personally. A short reply felt like attitude. A delayed response felt like disrespect. I was constantly reacting and constantly drained. One day, after catching myself getting irritated over something small, I stopped and asked a different question. What if this has nothing to do with me? That question didn't solve everything, but it slowed me down. It gave me space. And in that space, I saw how much of my anger was self-created. Not by events, but by the meaning I attached to them. That's the eureka moment. You don't need to control every situation. You need to interrupt the script, because the script is what turns moments into problems. Here's the shift in perspective. Instead of believing every thought that shows up, treat it like a suggestion, not a command. Just because your mind says, "That was disrespectful," doesn't mean it's true. And it definitely doesn't mean you have to act on it. A line to remember: you are not your first reaction. You are what you choose after it. And another: the moment you see the script, you are no longer controlled by it. That's where freedom begins. Not in avoiding difficult people, not in controlling the world, but in changing what happens inside you when the world does what it does. And once you start rewriting that inner script, you'll notice something else. A lot of your frustration was never about reality in the first place. It was about expectation. And that's exactly where we're going next. 3. Breaking the invisible contracts and expectations. Most frustration doesn't come from what people do. It comes from what you expected them to do. Quietly, without saying it out loud, you create these invisible contracts in your mind. If I'm kind, they should be kind back. If I show respect, I should receive it. If I put in effort, people should appreciate it. Sounds reasonable. But here's the problem: they never signed that contract. And yet, you hold them accountable to it. That's where frustration is born. Not in reality, but in the gap between reality and expectation. You're not upset because someone acted a certain way. You're upset because they didn't match the version of them you created in your head. And the tighter you hold that expectation, the easier it is to feel disappointed. Let's make this real. You go out of your way to help someone. Maybe a coworker, maybe a friend. You give your time, your energy. You show up when it's inconvenient. And later, when you need something small, they don't show up the same way. Not even close. That's when it hits. That's messed up. I would have done it for them. And now you feel it, that mix of irritation and disappointment. But look deeper. Are you upset because they did something wrong? Or because they didn't meet your unspoken expectation? Because in their world, they might not even realize there was a standard to meet. That's the invisible contract. You created it. You believed in it. And now you're suffering because reality ignored it. I remember a time I kept repeating this pattern. I was always the one who showed up early, put in extra effort, went a little further than necessary. And deep down, I expected something in return. Recognition, appreciation, at least acknowledgement. But most of the time, nothing came back. And that silence started to feel personal. Until, one day, I caught the thought, they should appreciate this. That word, should, was the trigger, not them. That one expectation was creating all the tension. Because reality doesn't follow your should. It just is. That's the shift. You stop negotiating with reality. You stop expecting people to behave according to your standards. Not because you lower your values, but because you stop projecting them onto others. Here's the truth most people resist. People act based on who they are, not based on what you deserve. And once you accept that, something changes. You stop taking things personally. You stop being surprised by human behavior. You start seeing people clearly, not as they should be, but as they are. That clarity protects your peace. A line to remember: expectation is the fastest way to turn reality into disappointment. And another: the less you demand from the world, the less power it has over you. This doesn't mean you become passive. It means you become selective. You choose where to invest your energy. You choose who deserves your effort. And most importantly, you stop giving emotional reactions to things that were never promised to you in the first place. That's freedom. Not because the world becomes fair, but because you stop expecting it to be. And once you drop those invisible contracts, you'll need something to replace them. A way to stay grounded, even when people still act unpredictably. That's where practice comes in, and that's what we're going into next. 4. Practical Stoic techniques. Understanding is not enough. You can agree with everything so far and still lose your temper tomorrow, because insight without practice fades fast. If you want to stop being controlled by anger, you need something repeatable. Something you can use in real time when emotions are already rising. This is where Stoicism becomes practical, not theory, not philosophy. Training. The first practice is simple but uncomfortable. Prepare for things to go wrong before they do. Most people wake up expecting the day to go smoothly. People will be reasonable. Things will go as planned. And when reality breaks that expectation, they react. But imagine starting your day differently. You take a few minutes and think, someone will be difficult today. Something will not go my way. I might be misunderstood. Not in a negative way, but in a realistic one. Now, when it happens, it doesn't shock you. You're not caught off guard. You're ready. And readiness reduces reaction. Second, reframe the people who test you. Instead of seeing them as problems, see them as training. Every difficult person is a chance to strengthen your control. Like resistance in a gym. No resistance, no growth. The coworker who interrupts you. The customer who complains. The stranger who acts cold. They're not ruining your day. They're giving you a chance to practice not being affected. That shift alone changes everything. Now you're not avoiding discomfort. You're using it. Here's a real example. You're stuck in traffic. Late for something important. Someone cuts you off aggressively. Instant reaction. Anger, frustration, maybe even the urge to respond. But instead of following that impulse, you pause. You remember, this is part of the day, not an exception. You loosen your grip on the situation. Nothing changes outside, but internally, the tension drops. You stop feeding the moment, and the moment loses power over you. I had a situation like this not long ago. A conversation started to turn tense. The other person's tone shifted, sharp, defensive. Old pattern. I would match that energy. Escalate. Prove a point. But this time, I caught it early. That slight rise in emotion, I noticed it. And I did something different. I said nothing. Not out of weakness, but out of control. A few seconds of silence. Then I responded calmly. And just like that, the entire direction of the conversation changed. Not because I controlled them, but because I controlled myself. That's the third practice. The pause. When emotion rises, don't speak immediately. Don't act immediately. Create space. Even a few seconds is enough to stop the automatic reaction. Most damage is done in the first impulse. Interrupt that, and you change the outcome. Here are 2 lines to remember. You don't rise to the level of your intentions. You fall to the level of your training. And control is not shown in what you say, but in what you choose not to say. These practices are simple, but not easy. They require awareness, repetition, patience. But over time, something shifts. You stop reacting as quickly. You recover faster. You carry less tension through the day. And eventually, you start to see your emotions differently. Not as something you are, but something you observe. And that's the final step. Because once you can observe your emotions, without becoming them, you become untouchable in a completely different way. Let's go there next. 5. Becoming the observer. At some point, control stops being about effort and starts becoming perspective. You don't win against anger by fighting it every time it appears. You outgrow it by no longer becoming it. That's the shift. Instead of being inside every emotion, you step back and watch it, like a passing storm that doesn't belong to you. Most people don't do this. When anger shows up, they say, "I'm angry." And in that moment, they merge with it. There's no distance, no separation, just reaction. But what if you changed one small thing? Instead of saying, "I'm angry," you notice, anger is here. Subtle difference. Massive impact. Because now, you're not the emotion. You're the one observing it. And what you can observe, you can control. Emotions lose intensity when they are seen clearly. Not suppressed. Not denied. Just seen without immediately acting on them. Let's bring this into something real. You're scrolling through social media. You see someone your age, more successful, more visible, more ahead. Instant feeling. Comparison. Then comes the thought, "I'm behind." And just like that, your mood drops. Now you feel frustrated, maybe even irritated at things that have nothing to do with it. But this time, you do something different. You pause, and instead of diving into that feeling, you step back and watch it. You notice the thought. You notice the emotion attached to it. No judgment, no reaction, just awareness. And something interesting happens. It starts to lose its grip, because it was never as solid as it felt. It was just a passing state, amplified by your attention. I remember a moment where this became clear. I was in a situation where someone spoke to me with clear irritation. Short tone, sharp words, the kind of moment that usually pulls you in. And I felt it, that familiar spark of wanting to respond. But instead of acting on it, I stepped back internally, almost like watching myself from the outside. I saw the reaction forming. I saw the urge to defend. And for the first time, I didn't follow it. I just let it pass. Seconds later, the intensity was gone. Not because I suppressed it, but because I didn't become it. That's the eureka moment. You don't need to eliminate emotions. You need to stop identifying with them. Because emotions are temporary. But the moment you attach your identity to them, they feel permanent. Here's the shift. You are not your anger. You are the space in which anger appears. And another. When you stop reacting to every emotion, you start mastering them. From this place, something powerful happens. You begin to see others differently too. That rude comment, you don't take it personally. You see it as a reflection of their state, their stress, their unresolved tension. People don't spread what they don't carry. So, instead of reacting with more tension, you respond with clarity. Sometimes even with quiet understanding. Not because you're trying to be nice, but because you're no longer pulled into their storm. And that protects your peace. This is what it means to become untouchable. Not invisible, not emotionless, but grounded, centered, unshaken by things that used to control you. And once you reach this point, you realize something deeper. The goal was never to control the world. It was to move through it without losing yourself. And that's exactly where we're going to close. At the end of all this, nothing outside of you has really changed. People are still unpredictable. Situations still go wrong. Disrespect still exists. The world didn't become easier. You just stopped making it heavier than it already is. That's the difference. You saw how anger is not something forced onto you, but something built, moment by moment, inside you. You saw the script, the expectations, the invisible agreements you were holding others to. And more importantly, You saw the space. That quiet space between what happens and who you choose to be in response. Most people never find that space. They live their entire lives reacting, pulled in every direction by things they don't control. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. You start moving differently. Slower, but stronger. Calmer, but more in control. Not because nothing affects you, but because not everything deserves access to you anymore. And that's the real shift. You don't become someone who never feels anger. You become someone who no longer belongs to it. Someone who can feel it, watch it, and let it pass without turning it into action. Without letting it define the moment. Here's what stays with you. The world will test you. People will test you. Life will not adjust itself to your comfort. But none of that has the final say. You do. Always. And the moment you truly understand that, you stop asking the world to be better so you can feel at peace. You become the one who carries peace into whatever the world gives you.